Okay, right. What's that? Yeah, sorry about last week. That was chapter 4. Chapter 5 now. Let's get things a little interesting, shall we? Anyways, chapter 5. I wrinkled my nose as the horse was led through the carnage and towards a clear path of ground. I hesitantly, I slipped off the animal and listened as my companions cleaned up. I knew I wasn't expected to join in. I couldn't do physical labor the same way they did. It usually made me feel useless. Nonetheless, I found my way into the abandoned cave to remain out of their way. A few stomps told me more than I needed to know about this place. It was a giant entrance with a slight tunnel heading deeper in. The tunnel was roughly circular and made of strong igneous rock. Gust had helped me discern which type of rock it was due to how it translated vibrations. This was most likely granite. The mountains in this area were mostly made of the stuff. It carried vibrations well, and always gave me a clear impression of the entire area. The hanging cliff over the village was also made of granite. As I walked towards the chamber beyond the tunnel, I passed the rest of the lingering elves, who had remained to make sure the entire place was barren. They didn't say a word as they headed for the entrance. I absently made note of their green presences as they left. I was still focused on the tunnel. I didn't have to stomp as much in this place. It was almost as if the stone that made up this entire area wanted me to find my way. My simple footsteps were enough for me to easily travel through the tunnels on my own. I knew there had to be a way for the dragon to fool the elves. Even with their heightened strength, speed, and senses plus magic, they could still be fooled. I found most of them still relied on their sight too much. As I walked down the tunnel, I could feel air moving past my back, against my back. I knew from a lesson Hidwar had given me, just after he had been healed as well as possible, that tunnels that carried a breeze had a way for the air to get out. His community had been a mining one before the dragon had attacked. There had to be a way for the air to get out again. I reached the central chamber. It was fairly big to say the least. The size of the tunnel seemed to dictate that the dragon we were facing against was at least half the size of the one that had destroyed my village. I had no doubt that there was more than one way into here. I believed Isabel was right that this dragon was particularly smart, predominantly since it had left an ambush of goblins to get rid of us. I knew that if I'd been in its place, I would have certainly made sure I had more than one exit to this cave. I used several stops to figure out this large area. It had a pile of branches arranged into a bowl shape, no doubt the dragon's nest. There was a pile of what must be bones beside it. I could instantly tell the dragon didn't live in this chamber. There was no smell from the bones at all. They were merely there for decoration. I would have been able to smell anything more than several months dead. Also, the bowl-shaped pile of branches didn't have any scent other than old wood. They weren't used either. I would have scented sweat or musk or freshly split wood if it were otherwise. This was a completely fake setup to prevent anyone from finding the real entrance to the dragon's cave. It worked exceptionally well on anyone relying too much on their sight. It failed against me. I could also note that the floor of the cave was rough everywhere except along the tunnel and for a straight stretch that ran towards the wall opposite the tunnel's entrance to the cave. It wasn't something that could be seen at all. I brushed my fingertips against the section of the floor to make sure that was what I was feeling. Halfway through my inspections, I became aware of Lyle's presence heading down the tunnel. I could never mistake his vibrant turquoise glow from those of the other elves in our hunting group. He was also carrying a small flaming torch with him. I could feel its heat. "Rydier says there's nothing here for you to find," he said when he reached me. "That dragon left before we got here. He wants you to return to the camp. They've cleared the remnants of the battle out of the clearing and are about to set up the tents. You're going to share one with Isabel." "They're wrong," I said softly. "The dragon hasn't left. It never lived in this cave at all. This is just an entrance to the actual cave." "What makes you say that?" he asked skeptically. He really should know better than to ask. "There's nothing to suggest that this wasn't recently abandoned." "That's because you're using only your eyes," I scolded. "This was built so you think it's been abandoned. The bones have been sitting there for several years, or I would have smelled the decay of a recent meal. There is no sweat or any other smells that would indicate anything has been using the branches as a nest. There's a breeze flowing through here, and it doesn't head upwards to the roof of this place. It heads straight ahead. Also, there is a slight path heading through the center of this chamber, heading to the opposite wall from the entrance." "You're certain of this?" he asked. I glared slightly at him. He really should know after spending all those years together, all 10 years, I might add, since he was brought to the settlement before I arrived. It was times like this that I seriously wanted to punch his jaw off. "Forgive me, I asked," he muttered softly, turning away from me. "So, how do we get past this chamber? There is nothing but a solid wall of rock in this direction." "Not quite," I replied, heading to the wall. I reached it and knocked against it lightly. As anticipated, it echoed slightly, like an upturned bowl placed on a counter. Now, this wall wasn't as thick as it should have been according to Lau's observations. "You hear that? It's not solid." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said sullenly. "You know very well I hate it when you call me that," I snapped. "Just get over here and help me find a way in." "If you insist," he grumbled, coming over anyways. "Not like they're going to find anything. Not like we're going to find anything." Either the dragon can push it open, or there was some other way. If it doesn't do that, I mused to myself. I ran my fingers over the stone wall. There doesn't appear to be any pressure applied to the wall, so there must be something it does to get in. I can't climb this wall on my own, but there might be something a little higher up that we couldn't reach, but the dragon would. "Are you done yet?" asked Lyle. I could tell he was rolling his eyes due to the irritated tone in his voice. "Rydier wanted us back yesterday. You know how he gets when he's mad." "He's always mad," I intoned. "He can wait all he wants. I'm not leaving until I find that dragon. Do you mind shifting into your lynx form? I need you to press that little outcropping up there." I pointed at the one in mind. He sighed deeply, which turned into a grumbling half-growl as he transformed. I moved out of the way as there was a scrabbling of paws against the stone floor. He ran at the wall and leaped as high as he could, just nicking the outcropping. It slid down and the wall swung open. "Now I believe you," he said, transforming back into his human form. His tone suggested his jaw had settled firmly on the floor. "Pick up your jaw and follow me," I said softly as I edged towards the entrance. "Be quiet, we don't want to alert the dragon we're here." He didn't say anything, but picked up his torch, which he had dropped when he transformed, and followed me into the tunnel the wall had opened up to. It was pretty much the same size as the tunnel exiting into the fake chamber. This one continued on in a straight line without branching or curving. The moving air I had noted from the previous tunnel was much stronger as it flowed through this one. Lyle's torch flickered wildly at my back as we continued walking. Neither of us said anything while we walked. I didn't know about him. I think he was mainly focused on following me, but I let my senses wander. This was one smart dragon. I could tell the tunnel came to a platform outside. This was a shortcut through the mountain and headed straight to the other side where the real cave was probably situated. No wonder why this one hadn't been killed off already. There was no way Rainier was going to be able to kill this one just by waiting for it to come back, as he thought it was going to do. The dragon probably saw us coming in the first place, fled back to its cave, leaving the other one to look as though it had been abandoned. As I had concluded, it had fooled all who came across it. Now it was time to show the beast that it couldn't fool everyone. I slowed as we reached the end of the tunnel. Lyle's torch flickered one last valiant attempt to stay lit and promptly went out, removing the war I was feeling from it. Lyle bumped into me from behind. "There's a cliff," I breathed as quietly as I could. "It leads to a narrow ledge. We have to go slowly." For once, he didn't ask. We inched out together until we reached the barren rock beyond. The wind picked up greatly as we reached the mouth of the tunnel. For the first time since we set out on this hunt, my vibration sense failed me. The wind was so vicious that I couldn't make out much of the landscape. I could only make out a bit of the edge I was standing on. All the moving air buffeting me was scrambling my finely tuned vibration sensing ability. I tugged Lyle closer to me. He was my anchor from not only falling back into the rock wall, but also toppling over the edge. "Describe it," I demanded as I pulled his ear closer to me. I tried to keep all the fear I was feeling out of my voice. Jagged mountains, as far as the eye can see," he said clearly. "The cliff isn't as sheer as it first looks. The narrow ledge is about the width of your cot and looks well worn. I can't see the bottom of this cliff. It goes so far down." "Very comforting," I grumbled. "Lead me along the edge until we are out of the wind." "I haven't seen you like this since the first year after you were brought to camp," he observed. "Are you all right?" "This wind is throwing me off," I snapped at him. "Do it quickly!" I let him take my arms and lead me along the ledge, straight to an alcove, covered slightly from the wind. It took me a few minutes to recover my bearings. The wind slid along the mountainside, sliding along the mountainside, was highlighting the formations within several meters surrounding me. "You okay?" he asked. "What do you think?" I snapped before repenting. "I'm sorry. I'm so used to having all my other senses work for me that I was staggered when I temporarily lost another one." "You what?" "I feel vibrations around me," I replied through gritted teeth. I wasn't about to tell him about the auras just yet. "I haven't told anyone about it. Why do you think I can tell every time you try and sneak up on me? I can feel you walking through the ground. You're not exactly the lightest person on their feet." "Who else knows about this?" he asked. There was enough hurt in his voice that I had to prevent myself from portraying any guilt. Gust, Rainier, Tidwar, I replied. I didn't want to tell anyone when I found out, but Gust was the first and he helped me with most of it. Rainier figured out as I went to the training in fighting. When I asked to be trained in fighting, Tidwar guessed it when his beard was starting to grow back. The wind, all that moving air, stripped me of my proper navigation. I couldn't focus on just the landscape because of all the random vibrations caused by the wind. Why am I the last one to know about this? He asked, sounding very hurt. You could have told me all those years ago. You could have... Shush! I exclaimed as a glowing red haze entered my mind from somewhere behind me. He instantly shut up. He must have seen the horror on my face, and I'm sure he would have continued on protesting. I could now tell that the alcove we were crouched in wasn't just the space we took shelter in, as I thought it was. There was more to it than that. I knew we were facing out towards the ring of jagged mountains Lyle had described briefly. I could also tell that this particular depression in the rock was folded in such a way that it easily hid another entrance from anyone not looking carefully for it. It was another clever ploy where sight would have failed. I only knew I had found the right cave because of the red aura marking the position of the dragon. It was extremely close to the only other one I had noted when Rainier had brought one back for a public killing. I was completely sure the beast had been watching us as we crouched just in the entrance to its cave. There was no way it couldn't have heard us. I froze. I didn't make a single movement as I strained to figure out when the beast would leap. It was at that moment that I realized I had forgotten my bow back at my back with the horse. I didn't have any weapons to help me kill it. I slowly motioned for Lyle to remove his sword from his belt. Just as slowly, he removed it as best he could in our cramped space. My physical combat skills were going to be useless against something with razor-sharp teeth, claws. Its scales were like solid rock protecting it, and it could even spit fire. I was just wondering why we weren't burned to a crisp when it lunged towards us. "Look out!" I yelled as Lyle sprang away from the entrance and pulled me out of the way with him. I had to trust him not to pull me too close to the cliff edge. The wind blew past me again, scrambling my vibration sense again. The only thing I could rely on to know how this battle was going was to focus on the giant red haze in the shape of the dragon and Lyle's turquoise human-shaped aura. I was proud to admit that my constant throwing and beating up on him had at least taught him how to take a hit and keep going. I'm sure the dragon roared and growled as it battled, and Lyle screamed and grunted just as much, but I couldn't detect it as my body felt like it was being thrashed by the wind. There was nothing I could do as the dragon completely left the cave and Lyle circled around it. The dragon spread its wings in anticipation of flying away from the cliff and attacking from the air. I suddenly remembered Gus telling me about a bird he had saved in his youth. It couldn't fly with a broken wing. He had reset it and splinted it for several weeks before he had taken it off and given the bird back its freedom of flight. I knew I could use that principle on the dragon. If its wings were broken, it wouldn't be able to fly. I might be able to do something to help Lyle after all. This was my chance. I was going to have to act fast before it could fly. I focused on the ground beside me. My body was beginning to get used to constant wind and was regaining a little sense of what was surrounding me. I made sure I knew where the edge of the cliff was before I charged the dragon. I didn't aim for the head. I aimed for the right wing. As it tensed to take off, I linked my hands together and slammed them both down on the wing joint. I felt something snap as the dragon roared in pain. My exertion made me trip over the wing, now flopped helpless in front of me. The dragon slipped and started to topple over the edge of the cliff. To my horror, I realized my weight had put it off balance, and I was going with it. There was nothing I could do to prevent it. I know I erupted into a shriek as we went over. I'm sure Lyle was screaming too, but the only other vibrations I could pick up that weren't coming from the wind came from the pained roar of the dragon. For the most part, I was protected by the wing I'd landed on, but halfway down my head hit some rock, jutting out slightly. All my other senses failed me, and I knew no more. And that's the end of Chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to go back to listening to my music as I type.